So yeah, wanted to talk to you a little bit about the thesis we have about why cross-platform is actually a really big opportunity in the free-to-play game space. And secondly, where it can be challenging and a few lessons that we've learned kind of along the way. So just a little bit really quickly on us, which mostly you can read here. I think there are kind of three things about what we're doing as a developer and a publisher that are different than a lot of people. First of all, we're building mid-core core games that are just bigger, deeper, richer, higher quality. From our viewpoint, the game business is all about entertainment, and we want to make stuff that people remember years after they played it for the first time. Secondly, all of our games are actually synchronous multiplayer. So we're kind of leaning into the fact that as human beings, we love playing things with people in real time, not something people have seen a whole lot on mobile, a big part of what we're doing. And the third thing, which we're going to talk about today, is being cross-platform. Trying to be there all day long with our gamers. So look, when we told the story at Rumble, or after we launched our first game, King's Road, we get a lot of nods around, hey, this is a really high quality experience. The synchronous multiplayer thing is really cool, looks hard to do. But I get kind of some strange looks when I talk about cross-platform. People kind of like turn their head. It's one of those things that maybe isn't as obvious when you first think about it in the world as maybe it will be after we chat about it a little bit. So the first thing is, look, the game business is going to the moon. You can't find any analyst out there that doesn't think it's going to be a $100 billion business over the next couple of years. And interestingly, the driver of that, and by the way, that's $100 billion in software. For those of us that have some gray hair, the console business, hardware and software worldwide, just a few years ago was $35 billion. So for the business on the software side to be $100 billion by 2017 is massive growth. But what's interesting is what's driving that growth. 60% of it is seen to be by mobile and online, and that splits about 2/3 mobile, 1/3 online. So while mobile is the hot area that we're all talking about, the PC gaming is not dead yet, and it's driving a huge portion of this growth. So look, generally there's a lot to be excited about. So when you think about that opportunity, we came up with a thesis. We basically said, look, if we're going to spend a lot of money building big games and really good quality games, why not enable the player to have the game with them all day long? We certainly do it with our books, we do it with movies, we do it with music. Why not with games? So that when they're in line at Starbucks to get coffee, they get a break at work, or they're at home at night and they're pulling out their tablet, they're still with us and still playing. That was our thesis. And the driver of this thesis is what we think is the most important metric in the free-to-play game business, which is long-term engagement. There's a whole lot of people in the business today, and if you look at the top 10 list, it's filled with people who optimize for near-term metrics. You hear a lot of discussion about how fast can I pay myself back the cost of the install. I think they have that wrong, and I think you're going to see more and more people move away from it. You've got to be in the business of trying to get people so that they want to invest months of their life in your game. And when they do that, they become viral, they tell other people about the game, and they end up converting to spenders, and they spend more money. Time in game means a successful game business. Long-term engagement, I believe, is what it's all about. So when you think about being with the player all day long, you quickly get to the fact that being cross-platform can have a huge impact on long-term engagement. So the stars are aligning, I think, as well in terms of what's going on technologically. So when you think about this chart showing tablet adoption and the penetration in the US, and it's slowing down a little bit, but it's still massive. We now have this world-class game-playing device that almost everybody in the US and Europe have around them. Perhaps more importantly, the power of these devices from a graphical perspective, whether it's a phone or it's a tablet, are only getting better. So the devices can do more. They're going to be able to make better games and enable the kind of things that we want to create. You then get to the bottleneck around network connectivity, especially if you're doing synchronous multiplayer games like we are. But again, you've got trillions of dollars being invested to make those pipes, whether they're on your phone or to your house on Wi-Fi, fatter. And the future, gets pretty interesting. If you look out a couple of years, there's a whole lot of people that think that 5G is going to be a stronger connection on a mobile device than your current broadband Wi-Fi is today. And we're just talking a couple of years. So what both of those things do, better, faster chipsets and better network connections, is they're going to drive the proliferation of new devices, even into places where right now PCs and mobile devices don't go. So things like smart TVs and micro consoles are going to enter the domain of where the console was and further allow us to be with our players throughout the day in all the rooms of their life. So look, it's interesting that despite everything I just talked about, 99.9% of the people in the world are still focusing on one platform at a time. But there are a couple of exceptions, and one of them happens to be one of the few companies that's had an IPO in the game space in the West recently, and that's King. So I don't know how much you guys know about King's story, but Candy Crush was a web-based game for a while before it launched on Facebook. And interesting, if you think about where it was about 2 years ago, right when they launched the mobile, they had a nice, healthy web business. They were doing about $40 million in a quarter. So they launched mobile. What do you expect to see happen? You expect the mobile to grow, obviously, because they just launched it. But in fact, launching on mobile actually grew the web business. And you look quarter over quarter, all of a sudden now they're a powerhouse game built on the backs of not only an incredible amount of revenue coming in on mobile, but almost a tripling of the revenue they were making on the web. So King's been pretty circumspect with sharing the data about their cross-platform play, but they have been very upfront saying they think this is one of their secret sauces. And for anybody that's played Candy Crush, once you get addicted to it, you find your breaks at work, and then you go home or you're in line at Starbucks and you got it on your phone, you just don't stop playing it because it's with you all day long. It's the magic behind their success, I believe, in a fundamental way. And if they were, I think, more forthcoming, we would hear more details on it. So we, with our first game, King's Road, are actually also cross-platform now, and I will share you a little bit more detailed data. This is a video of the game just to give you a little context of what we're talking about. It's a little different than Candy Crush Saga. But that doesn't mean that the impact can't be just as great. So we did a limited release a couple months ago. Went out on iOS only in a couple of territories where, frankly, we don't make any money on the website. So non-monetizing countries. And we learned a couple of interesting things. The first, and I think the interesting piece, was that we didn't cross-promote. So while we had tens of thousands of users in each of these territories on the website, we didn't tell them there was a mobile version available, and we didn't tell the mobile users there was a web version available. They might have figured it out on their own because when they registered on the mobile side, there was an ability to connect accounts. But otherwise, we didn't do anything to drive them. But over a period of about 5 or 6 weeks that we've been live, we're now seeing 15% of the people playing every day, playing both places every day. So without any prompting, we got a pretty large and growing. That number was 5%, went to 10, now it's about 15. We think it'll be at 20% shortly. So interestingly, we saw a big win just going out on the tablet limited release where the monetization per user tripled. But here's where it gets interesting. That 15% of players that are playing both places, 27 times the amount of money. In fact, they went from some of the worst monetizing users we had in the world, and we're talking about countries like the Philippines and Brazil here, to some of the best monetizing users. And by the way, again, King doesn't share the numbers, but I think their numbers would look very, very similar to this. It's similar not only on a conversion percentage, but also on an ARPDAU percentage. So we saw a big gain, again, when we went to mobile. But in that cohort that plays in both places, really impactful. And finally, because I talked about the importance of the metric of long-term engagement, a little tougher to connect this directly to the mobile side, but our numbers have gotten better and better and better. And the thing we look at really closely is we look at our veteran users, those that have been in the game longer than a month, and we want to know in the next 30 days how many of them on a percentage basis play 10 plus times. Because we know those are highly engaged ongoing users. We're north of 50% actually in the month of July, and the number's gone up radically since we did the limited release. And specifically in those territories, it's gone up a lot. So the users are telling us they like playing in both places, they're playing more when they do, and they're spending a lot more money. So hopefully that piques your interest in thinking about being cross-platform. So now let's talk about why it's hard. So look, the first thing we ended up doing, we invested several years and several $1 million in building a separate back end that all of our games could plug into and that it could talk to Android, iOS, Facebook, rumblegames.com, agnostic to the client technology that was used. And that was key for us to enable this kind of synchronized experience where the player playing on the web could be playing with the player on the phone. And if I didn't make that clear when I showed you the video of Kings Road, when you pick up a tablet on iOS, you're playing with a player on the PC. It just picks straight up from where it was. So the back end is a big piece. Perhaps more importantly, you got to think thoughtfully about the design side. The use case on a PC is very, very different than the use case on a mobile device. So the same player, the same person that will sit down at a table, pull out their PC and play for an hour uninterrupted in a very focused way, you give them that same game, but you do it on a tablet or a phone, all of a sudden they're going to be distracted. They're not going to be staring at the screen in the same way, and it's unlikely they're going to have the amount of time. So you better be really careful about not lowest common denominating your design and thinking very thoughtfully, if you want to be cross-platform, of whether your game works in both places or what changes you got to make to the game to have it work. Secondly, some games are going to work. Candy Crush obviously does. The bigger, richer games can be a little tougher. And so you don't want to be cross-platform just for the sake of being cross-platform. One of the things we've had to get a lot better at is how we manage the operational side. So now that we're in a world where Kings Road lives both on the web and on iOS, we got to manage our release cadence. We got to be thoughtful about what's on the server side from an architectural point of view, so that when we update the client, we don't have to update it as often. And we're very used to a fast cadence on the web, right? If we wanted to push a build, we'd push a build whenever we wanted to. It's not the way it works in the world of Apple or Google. You got to go through a submission and approval process. So it took a while to create the process, kind of the discipline and the systems to make that work, but we've now got that humming pretty well. So a couple of things we've learned along the way as we've kind of tackled this. The first is, don't try to roll your own engine unless you've got a lot of money and a lot of time. There are people out there that are bringing tools to make the client side of the game work, whether at the end of the day you want to have it compile and run on a mobile device or on a PC. So whether that's Unity or Unreal, and you might not know the logo in the top left, it's a company called Xamarin, which actually does the framework that powers Unity's cross-platform. And there's a lot of technology being built on the top of that makes cross-platform right. But there are enablers out there for you to take advantage of. And we're certainly doing that. Secondly, we talked a little bit about avoiding lowest common design. When we first built Kings Road, we knew we wanted it to come out on mobile as well. And so the design of the game was inherently less keyboard driven and a lot more mouse driven. And the reason we made that decision is because our assumption was your finger can function a lot like a mouse, but translating the keyboard to a touchscreen device, quite a bit tougher. And so if you're going to start on one platform or the other, you need to be thinking ahead in terms of your thoughtfulness around design, especially around that user input piece. The second thing is in recognition of the difference of the use cases and the devices, is we made a bunch of changes to the way the game runs. So a lot of the UI elements that existed on the HUD on the PC, we embedded through drawers, and this is kind of an example of them being pulled out, in a much friendlier mobile way. We increased the size of all the UI elements so that they're finger-sized even on a phone, so much easier to touch, where you get very, very fine when you're on a PC. And then we even changed the play experience. So, one of the things that I think is tough when you're playing an action-oriented game like Kings Road is that you're going to get fatigued sticking your finger and attacking monsters constantly in the same way that you click a mouse. So we actually made the default an auto attack. So you'd choose who you were going to attack, you're still pulling off your skills, you're still very involved in making decisions that drive outcomes, and you can certainly use your finger as often as you want to, But the default is it's actually auto-attacking when it gets to an enemy. And we instantly prefer it. In fact, now it's coming back in as an option on the PC browser side as a result. So those are a couple of examples of some of the changes that we made to make it work, even though it's a single unified game experience. So I'm going to show you a second game of ours. It's a first-person shooter called Ballistic. And I hope we have audio here, but we might not. Doesn't sound like we do. I don't think I could sing very well, so. But hopefully you get a sense of the quality of the experience. This is a Unity-based game that's in a live beta right now on the web. It's actually being built by a third party. We're the publisher. Amazing how much impact audio has. It's like, anyway, I think you get the drill. So look, the reason I show that is that's a game that's built in Unity. So we have a prototype that actually works on iOS and Android. First-person shooters are unique, even beyond the stuff we talked about around UX and UI design and thinking about the use case differently. It's a player versus player game. It's a hyper-competitive game. What works in a shooter is my ability to use my skill to beat you. And the granular sense of control is everything. So as we create Ballistic on mobile, and we're actively in development, it is one of those situations where having the player on the phone or the tablet play against the player on the PC all of a sudden upsets the apple cart. And the value of that PvP competitive balance experience gets thrown out the window. So when you've got a very skill-based PvP game, you've got to think about how you're going to tear apart the game but still keep the advantages of cross-platform. So in our case, that means keeping account registration, progression, friends, guilds, all of those things completely unified. But when you're fighting on the mobile version of the game, you're going to be playing against other mobile users, not against the PC users. So where we could get away with that on King's Road on the browser side, because it's a cooperative game, you can't do it on a PvP game. And look, the last piece I'll leave you with is that one of the real advantages that we found, maybe without knowing that we were going to figure it out beforehand, is that the kind of games we're building, especially in free-to-play, because we had never built free-to-play games before, and there really wasn't a whole lot of people to look at as models here in the West for big RPGs or shooter games, is iteration. So you're constantly operating the game live, getting feedback from the players, turning dials, experimenting, adding new features, and learning. That's an easy thing to do on the web. That's a difficult thing to do on mobile, at least in the current state of affairs in the ecosystem. Google's made it a little bit easier recently with running betas, but in terms of quickly and easily acquiring users inexpensively, in terms of being able to push builds without having to go through any kind of an approval process, that ability to kind of iterate and learn fast on the web has huge advantages. The second piece, and I can't yet share data because we haven't done the full launch of King's Road, that'll happen here in a couple of months, is that we've had, I think, 6 million people install and play King's Road. We've got a huge audience to leverage from a user acquisition point of view. So the day we go live in the App Store or on Google Play, our ability to reach out and spark all those people to drive installs, we think is going to be invaluable. So there's some advantage on that side of the fence as well. And that's all I got for you. Hopefully there was some value in that, but happy to take questions and illuminate anything.
Well, thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Well, I'll start the questions going. How do you deal with things like art assets? If you've got a wide range of resolutions from some retina display down to a very small screen, do you scale things up? Do you have different bitmap textures? Can you describe some of the techniques you use to make it work on both high-res and low-res screens?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, I think there's a good news and then there's the being thoughtful. The good news is the screen resolution on mobile devices is matching high-end PCs these days, right? And so you've got high-end specs that are not that far apart. But you do have to be thoughtful to make sure your source art is at pretty high level so that you can obviously degrade it if you need to. The harder problem is going the other direction. So if you're creating it in low resolution and then you want to leverage retina display or something like that, that's tougher. And so, we kind of, I think being ex-console and PC developers, we'd kind of seen that movie before and decided to overinvest in the high quality of the original art assets.
Question?
Thanks for all that information. If you're independent and you're on a limited budget, ideally you want to be cross-platform because you want to be everywhere. But given the fact that mobile is so competitive and discoverability is a major issue, what platform would you recommend for an independent game studio to go out first on?
Now, when you say platform, are you talking about the client-side technology or a platform?
Would it be mobile? Would it be PC? Would it be Facebook?
In terms of priorities to market?
Yeah, exactly, priorities.
Yeah, so look, I think it's tough to argue with mobile right now. I mean, wherever you've got a situation where there's tremendous growth happening, a large captive audience, a much better solution in terms of I want to spend money and I hit a button and there's no friction in that purchase, you're going to win. The challenge that you've got with the web and Facebook, they're a little bit different. Facebook's got the inherent challenge, at least for us at Rumble. And by the way, they've been a great partner, and we have a really nice business on Facebook, so no negative. But Facebook, at least in most of the Western markets, is known by its players as a casual game portal. So anybody that wants to play a game like Kings Road or Ballistic has long ago decided this is a place where their aunt plays Farmville and not a place they look for AAA quality games. And if they've clicked on ads that looked like they were going to be core games, they've generally felt cheated or that someone misled them. So it's a little bit like trying to sell men's suits at a women's boutique, and it's a challenge. On the browser side of the fence, it's just a tough thing to do acquisition. That players aren't located in places that make it easy at scale to grab them. The only advantage is the one I just talked about, which is when you go out on the PC first, it's a much easier place to refine and optimize the gameplay than it is on mobile, especially if you're doing synchronous multiplayer. Because one of the things you got to care about is having enough users to play with each other. The worst thing is the play with friends or I want to play with somebody button and it spins forever because there's nobody else to play with. And so the PC is a much easier place to kind of not only learn and figure out how your game's going to succeed, but also to kind of build the ballast of audience before you launch on mobile. Hope that was helpful.
Any more questions? Maybe one more question for me. Is this the beginning of the end of the traditional console? Now with a iPad-like device and some Tegra chips, you could pretty much get Xbox 360, PS4 sort of kind of performance in your mobile device that you can carry around anywhere.
No, look, I think that's right. I think using your word choice, particularly, this is the beginning of the end. So consoles aren't dead. I mean, the experience of sitting in front of a big screen TV with a great controller on your hand and the high quality production values that the people that are building console games are creating, that can't be replicated right now. And that living room experience is still great. And there is an audience that loves it and will spend a lot of money doing it. The problem is that audience is not growing, it's shrinking. And as you said, when you look at the new tablets, they're as powerful and, per the slide I showed earlier, becoming increasingly more powerful day over day to the point where those kinds of experiences can be brought. And to the extent that somebody's still worried about it being on a big screen and having a controller, that's where the smart TVs and I think the micro consoles have a real opportunity to make hay. So if you're Sony or Microsoft, I think you've got to be thinking very hard about where your business is going to be 6-7 years from now.
Okay.
Anything else? Look, appreciate it. Thanks. Grateful to have a chance to
Thank
talk
you
to
very
you.